everybody, and welcome back to part 22, the final episode of this playlist, building Revell's 144 scale Flower Class Corvette with the Pontos detail set. So she's all done. I've just worked this week on the last few details, mainly taken up with getting the rigging fitted. But that's all done now. It's relatively simple rig on the Flower Class Corvette, at least the amount of rig that I've chosen to do. And I've done one or two other little bits and pieces just to finish the model off. So for the last time, I'll bring the camera over and I'll show you what it's taken just to get this one finished up. Okay, so we're at the bench now, and I'm just going to wander around the instructions really and get all the last bits and pieces finished up. A couple of episodes ago I built these davits for the two main ship's boats. So they're ready to go. I just need to prime a couple of them. I've got a couple of these basket type structures to make. This is the first one I've already done. I'm not sure what it is. It's probably just a stowage of some sort. But it goes next to the davits, so I'm getting those ready now. So obviously we need to make some bends on this. Put the base up first. These are the sort of parts that I now like to solder. They're very fragile to try and get any sort of glue on them. It's very difficult to do that way, so I prefer to solder these now. Find it much easier than using cement. So just try and bring it all together onto the base. And I'm just going to solder into the corner, and it should run down a bit and seal the base as well. So in we go with a bit of flux. Make sure it goes down onto that base. Give it a little bit of a clean up, bit of a polish. But I didn't use an awful lot of solder on that, so there's not much to do. These railings are also in the vicinity of the davits, and I think these have some rigging attachments on as well. And obviously we'll be doing the rigging a bit later on in the video. One of the last things to do on the ship. So just a simple couple of bends, and we have a mirror image on the other side. Whilst I've got the soldering iron out for these baskets, I do have a final davit base to build, and that's for the aft side of the ship. It's actually the loading davit for the depth charge chutes, and the Revell plastic part's completely replaced with Pontos etched brass, so I'll make that up now. So I'm just trying to gather as many of these small detail parts as I can, ready to prime and paint them all at once, and then, as you've seen in previous episodes, I'll then go back to the ship and assemble them onto the ship. So just 3 parts. There is a base plate that goes inside here, sliding into some grooves on the inside of the part. And that base also makes sure that we get that nice and square So just before I fold the final face of this box, I'll just solder this base into position. Doing that, of course, just make sure that everything's nice and square as well. That's the base, and obviously it's at an angle, you can see at the bottom there. That's just to conform to the shape of the deck. Now for the davit itself, and you might have seen before how I do these. You could glue these together, they would glue fairly well, but I prefer to solder. So just some flux on each face and just get them pinned together, lined up like that. And I'll just run a small amount of solder around the top edge. That's the davit. And obviously that's not going to come apart again. There will be a danger of with super glue that this might just part company again, so it definitely won't do that with solder. And there's a hole in the base that we squeezed in there. You can just see the davit popping out of the bottom there, and this pin here will go into a hole in the deck. I'll solder that into position so that it doesn't come loose. It's much better than the Revell plastic alternative for that. These are all the parts for the twin Lewis guns. There are 2 mountings, so 4 guns altogether. And they also have a pedestal from the Revell kit, so I've cut those off and cleaned them up as best I can. They're not the best looking parts really, and I will try to drill out the muzzle of the guns, although it's a very small diameter, but I'll give it a go, see if I can improve them in that way as well. So we'll cut these brass shields out instead. They should improve the look of these parts quite a bit, although of course they do need to be bent into shape. These very small rings are to brace the 2 guns together. They're obviously paired up, so they will slip over the muzzles. And they attach some way down the barrel, something like that. But the first thing I want to do is to try and get a little hole in the end, just to try and improve the appearance a little bit. I'm not going to try to drill these, I'll just use a pin to punch a hole really into the end. So I've got a needle here, very fine needle. This Revell plastic is very, very soft, so this is easy enough to do with a pin or a needle rather than a drill. Just helps a little bit. I might give those a little dry brush with some aluminium on the end just to accentuate that hole that I've made. We're not going to get that on camera, but it is there. See what I mean about the delicate plastic? So that's always going to be very fragile now once that's broken. But we do have those little rings that bind the two barrels together, so that'll add a little bit of support to it. See how we do with that. I'll just let it dry for a bit whilst we look at these shields. Again, we've got these parts here which will help us form the shape of the shield at the front. And on these Pontos, you'll notice, give us these ridges etched into the rear face, and they're just to help us form that curve at the front. Let's see if I can bend these without annealing them. They might have to be annealed eventually. No, I will anneal them, it just make the job easier. So that's one of the shields. See if we can get the other one done as well. So this has already been annealed. These are a bit of a struggle, they're not the easiest things to shape. It's actually quite a complex curve on the shield. So what I'm doing is just using a bit of medium super glue to really just get this into roughly the correct position. And then pinch it together like that with the tweezers. So basically the softened brass shield forms itself around the brace. And then once it's in, I'll just drop some more super glue into the top where you're not going to be able to see it. And give it a squirt of accelerator. And that is then locked, and it's given us the correct shape on the underside. The top one is slightly easier because the bottom bracket has already pulled the shield into something closer to its correct shape. So I didn't want to go in, and rather than struggle with super glue, I find the best thing to do is to take the part off altogether, give it a good clean up, get rid of all the old super glue and just start again, because super glue will not adhere to itself, or it doesn't adhere very well to itself. So rather than get frustrated trying to just put lots more glue on, that won't work. Just take it off, give it a clean up, get the brass back to its original condition, and then just try again. So those are the two shields. Let's try and get the guns on now. I think the first thing I'll do is put the shield on to the pedestal. Those two brackets that I've just positioned have got some little notches in that just accept the pedestal like that. Okay, let's see if we can get the guns on. I suppose the trick here is to try and get these guns in parallel. And facing forward, obviously. That's not the easiest thing to do. Just about there with those. The last thing is to just get this little ring, or pair of rings, it's like a pair of spectacles, that goes over the end of the barrel. And just gently feed that down into position, and I'm just going to secure that with a tiny drop of extra thin cement. And then finally we have some detailing for the top of the magazine, the drum magazines on top of the gun. So they're much improved on the Revell basic parts. So again, that can go along with the other parts that we've done so far. Ready for some primer and paint. We won't have quite the same collection that we did in the last video. If I fitted a lot of Revell parts, particularly in part 21. But there's fewer to do this time, so it shouldn't take us as long to get these on. Those are all the midsection parts then. So I think I'll just skip forward to the bow. Last time I didn't manage to fit the breakwaters, so we'll get those sorted out. There's a flange to bend at the bottom of the breakwater here, and I need the long pliers for this because it's too much for these shorter ones, even though I prefer to use these if at all possible. I just find them more comfortable in the hand, but needs must, you've got to get the full length of this brass to bend it properly. And it's such a thin strip that has to be bent. Get a very firm grip on it. Some flux on there. Well, that's one side done. Actually, I'll bend this flange once I've soldered the parts together. I just found it easier on that one. Each of the breakwaters has a pair of brackets on them. And these also have a flange on them, even though they're so small. I can barely hold them. I'll build the jackstaff now, which goes right on the prow of the ship. We use the base of the Revell jackstaff, which is this. We have a turned brass staff as well that we'll fit onto the top. Need to drill a 0.5mm hole in this to accept the brass staff. So this is the jack staff. This is the ensign staff which goes on the aft superstructure. We'll do that in a while. The staff will feed through these brackets here. The brace will sit here at the back, but I think I'll leave that off and I'll just assemble it onto the model as I come to fit this part. Just to enable us to line everything up a bit better if we do it that way. So I think those are all the parts that I need for the next step. I think I've got some railings to do yet, but let's get these parts on first and then see where that leaves us. So we'll get some of these parts assembled now. Start off with the davits for the ship's boats. Once the davits are in position like that, we can just adjust the chains. Which are there to sling the boat. So they just need adjusting, the chains at the side, just until you get them in the right position. It's a bit of trial and error really to get them located properly. I've just added a couple of what look like cleats that go on the top of the davit there. Just to finish it off, I'll just paint the touch-ups all together, including these plain brass parts. I'll do all that at the same time. So I'm not doing things in any particular order. I'll just work through the parts that I've prepared until they're all fitted. These are the plastic Revell bollards which I forgot to fit last week. This is the depth charge handling davit, and that's located just ahead of the depth charge chutes. As I'm working around the model at this stage, I'm just noticing here and there some areas where I'm going to have to do a bit of cleanup. There are areas of super glue showing here and there, and I'll just treat that with some matte varnish sprayed through the airbrush, and that'll tidy up any little spots, any shiny spots of super glue that we can see on the model. These are the Lewis guns that I built earlier on, and I'll just paint the barrels in some light gunmetal. And I'll just pick out the stocks with some dark brown. So we've put the breakwaters on now. Those etched breakwaters are much finer than the Revell parts. They really do make a difference. We have a few pieces to fit here for the rest of the anchor gear. Just a bit more photo etch, and then we can fit the anchor chains and the anchors themselves. I should really have put these on before I painted this forward part of the deck, but somehow I just missed them. Now I just need to arrange the chains over the claws and just try and get one of the links to just go into that little hook on the end. It doesn't really matter if it doesn't, just as long as it looks as though it's draped over those devil's claws. I've knocked this piece off probably 5 times this afternoon. So let's hope that that's the last time I'm going to need to fix it. And then the jackstaff goes in a location hole right at the front of the bow. All we have to do now on the bow is fit the railings, which need rigging. Actually, they're not all etched brass. We have some stanchions with some rigging to place in them, or rigging thread. So we'll do that when we come to do the rest of the rig. I think I said a couple of episodes ago that I didn't want to fit these Carley rafts just yet, and that was because they didn't appear to have any lashing with them in the kit. So what I'm going to be doing is add some lashing from this rigging thread. This is from one of my wooden ship kits, and it's really high quality thread for rigging. It's not like ordinary cotton thread, which is sometimes a bit fuzzy. This is perfectly smooth and it's just fine for modelling. So let's try and smarten these Carleys up a bit. So I think it's worth putting that lashing on. It just gives the impression of the fact that they're just not floating on top of those platforms. Actually, to be absolutely accurate, they should be lashed to the eyelets at the side, but I couldn't really see a way of doing that in a neat sort of way, so I think that's a good representation anyway. This is the jackstaff brace, and obviously I didn't fit that at the time I built the jackstaff, because I wanted to get the position of it just right. Seemed like a good idea at the time. These are the last railings to fit, and they go alongside the bow of the ship. And each of the stanchions sits on a very small bracket. They're barely visible. If I zoom the camera into its maximum, you probably still can't see it. So that bracket requires folding, so it's got two sides to it, and I just did that by pinning it down onto the mat and using a knife blade just to lift the sides up. But it's very, very small, as you can see. Even though they're so small and apparently insignificant, I am going to fit them because they will just give a bit of extra support to these railings. One job that I've been putting off, I think, for the last few weeks actually, is fitting these small braces, and they go along the side of the hull. Here there are 36 of them altogether. Revell do provide the parts, but these photo etch parts in the Pontos set are much better, they're much finer, so I will be using these. All 36 require a bend to be made in them to create a flange on one side. So this is one of those slightly tedious aspects of ship modelling particularly, where you tend to get quite a lot of repeated parts in ship kits. But you've really just got to knuckle down and get on with it, really. There's no way around it. You could leave them off, I suppose, but they do add that little bit of detail to the model. So I'll get on with that. We'll come back when we're almost done. I'll just fit the last 2 or 3 of these on camera just so you can see how they go. But I'll see you on the other side. Okay, I've been round the sides of the hull and fitted these braces, and eventually I found what I think is the easiest way for me at any rate to get these fitted. So I'll show you that for the last 2 or 3 that I've got to do on the starboard side. The slight complication with them is that they're mainly the same size, but here, as the side of the ship rises a little bit from the deck, the braces are a little bit longer, so you have to just remember which is which and keep them separate. They are different lengths in the Pontos set. The other slight complication is that you have to keep the port set separate from the starboard set, because if you fold them correctly, you do have a handed set of, I think it's 18 on either side. And they are handed because you've got a different shape cut out at the top which fits alongside the bulkhead here. So it's requires a little bit of planning to get the parts folded up, painted in the separate batches, and applied separately. The best way that I've found to apply them is to just apply a small spot of thick super glue at the top of the bulkhead, and then just take the brace and just drop it onto the top like that, and just let it rest on the deck. No glue on the deck. And wait for that to set up. And we're going to have to touch all of these in eventually, because it's really difficult to get these to fit without scratching them a little bit. So they've gone in, but they were just as unpleasant to fit as I imagined they would be. That's why I've put it off, I suppose, for all this time. But anyway, they're in now. But now we'll have a look at fitting the mast and working out how we're going to approach the rigging for the ship. So this is the mast which I built 2 or 3 episodes ago now, and I'm going to prepare the mast for the rigging, and I'm going to be using a tip-off from Jim, who's been following the build and he's been building this model himself at more or less the same pace that I have for this build series. And Jim's contacted me quite a few times just to give me some tip-offs, and he's provided comments in the comments section just to give me some heads up about what he's found on the build. And the one that I'm going to be using this time, Jim, is your suggestion of fitting all the rigging to the mast before we actually ship it to the model. And I'm sure that's going to be a better way of approaching the build. So what we have on the mast is a number of stays. There are 8 stays altogether. And we also have the halyards for the signal halyards here, which attach to these blocks on the yard at the top of the mast. We've also got a radio fit as well, but I'll do that once the mast is in position. I'll just get the stays fitted and the signal halyards fitted at this stage. So for the rig, I'm going to be using Ushi van der Rosten rigging thread. This is the sort of thread that you would use for 132 scale aircraft, World War I aircraft. This is the 4005 code, which is 0.005 outside diameter, so it's the thin variety of thread. This is an elastic thread, so we'll be able to stretch it and get the tautness into the rigging. And I've got about 45 meters on this roll, so hopefully that will be enough. I think even at maximum magnification, it's also going to be difficult for you to see this at home as well. So I'll start with these bottom stays. The Pontos parts do have etched brass loops in them, so hopefully we'll be able to get the thread through those. So we'll start with these lower stays here. And I'll use just a tiny drop of super glue just to fix that line into place. So on this rig, the stays are in pairs, port and starboard, and they stay the mast aft and forward. So the stay attachment points are right up here at the top, and they're in pairs, so there's a stay which goes aft and one which goes forward on each side of the ship. And you could rig them separately, but I'm going to cheat a little bit. I've just brought the rear stay up through the aft hole, and I'm just going to go over and straight down through the hole for the forward stay. So we've gone up, across and down again, so both stays are attached. So I'll just lock them in position with some medium super glue. Obviously you want to make sure that the rig is exactly where you want it before you apply the super glue, because the glue will block the holes up and you won't get a second chance to do them. I'll get the mast fitted now onto the ship. Just want to keep all these lines out of the way. The mast on the Flower Class does have a bit of a rake on it, so we've managed to get that more or less right, I hope. Can now start to sort out some of this rigging and work out which stay goes where. Bit of a spider's web at the moment, but it'll become clear. Now I'm going to rig these stays to the points that are given in the Pontos instructions for the etched brass stays. And hopefully they'll be in the right place. Hopefully Pontos have done the research. These are too small to get on camera really, so I'm just going to press ahead and get them fitted, and then hopefully I'll be able to get some close-up pictures later on. So I'm just attaching these pieces of rigging in the same way that you might do with an aircraft aerial lead, something like that. Again, we're going to have to do some touching up to hide the glue spots that we're going to get here. With the halyards, I'll just do each pair in one run. So I'm just using a double length, just looped over at the top there. So I'm just hooking that loop over the block, which is up on the yard. And then these will eventually come down to the flag lockers. I think the best I'm going to be able to do with these is just to attach them to the railing just in front of the forward flag locker. Okay, so that's working, but it's virtually impossible to get any sort of meaningful footage on camera. I just daren't bring the camera in any closer. So I'm going to work along these halyards, get them all attached, and then we'll take a look at them when everything's put together. Okay, so the final bits and pieces now, and we've got the railings along the bow here. This first section here is from etched brass from the Pontos set, and I've fitted the 4 stanchions here along to the bow, and these have to be rigged with the rigging line, so 2 lengths of rigging line along those. So I'll just do the last couple of stanchions. You'll notice that I haven't painted the stanchions, and that's deliberate at this stage because I'm just concerned about getting paint blocking the holes up. And as you can see, the thread is so fine that any glue or paint in these stanchion holes will just block them up. But once they're attached, we can just secure them with a small spot of medium super glue. Just hold it there while the glue is set, because I think I mentioned before, this rigging thread will tend to pull back. It's attracted to the glue. You can see there it's wanting to go back. And if we do get it tangled up, it'll be quite a mess. So I think that's dry now. I'm just going to keep it taut just as a precaution, and then the last fixing is through the etched brass railing here at the front. Just check that that's secure. They just need a bit of a touch in with some white paint, which I'll do shortly. The last job, which I like to keep back on ship models, is the rudder and the propeller. It's kind of a ceremonial moment for me, really, fitting those last two parts. So I'll paint those up and then we'll come and get those on the ship. Okay, let's get these parts fitted. Just have to hold that a while. It's quite a slack fit. Okay, there we are. It's all done, with the exception of one or two touch-ups and repairs of some scratches here and there. We've got some glue spots that I need to take care of with a matte varnish, I think I mentioned earlier on in the video. But I'm not going to be doing any more build with that, just as I said, a case of tidying it up. Okay, so there we are. I'm pretty happy with how the ship's turned out. Overall, I think the Revell kit isn't the best, and I've struggled in one or two places to bring the model up to the level of detail that the Pontos set really demands. Some of the moulding on the finer detail parts isn't the best, and it really does take the Pontos etch brass and turn brass parts to bring it up to scratch, really. But I suppose a decent enough model could be made straight from the box if that's what you wanted to do. So that's the last build episode in the series. I'm going to be making a baseboard for the model in the next 3 or 4 weeks, so I will be showing you how that goes. So I'll get the touch-ups done, build the baseboard, and I'll show you how that looks in another video in a few weeks' time when all that work's done. So that's it in terms of naval projects for the moment. Just for the moment though, because there are a couple of other potential projects coming along in the wings. I haven't decided what I'm going to do next, but both options are quite involved. They're complicated kits, and both of them have Pontos sets again in them. So it's something that I can't just charge into. I need to do a little bit of planning and also really get my motivation up to tackle such a complicated project again. Both of them probably are going to require 10 months or so to complete, so it's another long project, somewhere like the hood project, and it's something that I'm just going to need to work myself up to. Plus, of course, you know that I've also got the Mosquito on the bench and P51 to finish off, and I really want to clear the bench before I embark on another big naval project like the hood was. So I have to say that this one has been a bit of a struggle in places, but it's done now and I'm pretty happy with it. So that's it for the ship build for the moment. I'm going to be moving the Mosquito up to the Friday night premiere slot for the next 2 or 3 weeks at least. And as you know, if you've seen part 5, I've already built the port engine from the Tamiya kit, and the next step is to tackle the brass-in starboard engine, which I'm going to be doing over the next few days, and hopefully we'll get that out next Friday night as usual. But in the meantime, everybody, thanks for your company over the last 22 episodes, and I hope you've enjoyed the build. So look after yourself, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.